All right, everyone, we're going to get started. Welcome to Museum of the African Diaspora. My name is Kijo Lee. I am Chief of Curatorial Affairs and Public Programs here at the museum, and I'm so delighted to be with these two design powerhouses for this final exhibition program of our season, Decolonizing Design. So you may have noticed, if you haven't already been through the exhibition as you were walking in, that this entire exhibition, Liberatory Living, Protective Interiors, and Radical Black Joy, is all about design and art together. I don't believe in the sort of barrier between the two. It is really about how do you craft interiors that allow you to imagine the world otherwise. Oh, good. We have a last-minute rush. I love it. So Dori's book, Decolonizing Design, was actually loaned to me as soon as I started thinking about doing a design exhibition. Our great brand manager and graphic designer on staff, Paul Playley, loaned it to me immediately. And now I have to buy him a new version because I dog-eared his to death. And it was the accessibility, humor, but paired with deep rigor and knowledge that really excited me. It paired really well with the way that I also try to curate exhibitions. And so it became the perfect sort of primer for deeper research into the design world. And then what would it mean for me to make a design show? This is my first and also the first at the museum. And so it's been really, not just instructional, but inspirational. Thank you for the snaps. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two wonderful speakers. First, Dr. Elizabeth Dori Tunstall is a distinguished design anthropologist, celebrated author, visionary organizational leader, consultant, and coach. As renowned author of Decolonizing Design, a Cultural Justice Guidebook, she is a pathbreaker of liberatory approaches that challenge conventional design paradigms and exclude and harm Indigenous, Black, and other cultural communities. With a global career encompassing an associate professor of design anthropology at the University of Illinois Chicago and Swinburne University in Australia, respectively, Dori made history as the first Black and Black female dean of design faculty anywhere at MoAD University in Toronto, Canada. Her accomplishments have been recognized with numerous prestigious awards, notably the 2022 Sir Misha Black Award for Distinguished Service to Design Education, the inaugural Badge of Honor for Design Education from the Black Artists and Designers Guild, and the 2023 Sedge Excellence in Design Education Award. Ever expanding the context for liberatory joy, Dori has established Dori Tunstall, Inc., a firm dedicated to decolonizing and diversifying institutional processes for companies and organizations through strategic consulting, care shops, corporate education, and leadership coaching. Please join me in welcoming Dori Tunstall. And now we have George McCalman. George has also been really influential to my time in San Francisco. He's one of the first people that I met here, and we've become fast friends. Oftentimes causing my CEO to have agita because she wants us to design something, and we're like, let's academicize it. So George McCalman is an artist and creative director based in San Francisco and Grenada. His design studio, McCalman Co., collaborates with a wide range of cultural clients. McCalman's background in the editorial world has been a foundation of his storytelling, and his decision to cultivate his fine art practice alongside brand work reframed his perspective and synthesized the importance of design. His first book, Illustrated Black History, Honoring the Iconic and Unseen, was published in September 2022 to profound accolades by the New Yorker's Hilton Owls, NPR, the New York Times, and the San Francisco Chronicle. His book won an NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work by a debut author in February 2023. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming George McCalman. And I must mention that this program is presented in conjunction with the current exhibition, Liberatory Living, which is on view only through tomorrow. So if you haven't had a chance, please take a walk through. And with that, I want to turn it over to these two brilliant humans. Thanks so much.
First of all, before I start addressing Dori, I always address the audience because this is one of 1,000 things going on in the city, and you all decided to come here. And so we're grateful for your attendance. Thank you. This is an exciting period in MoAD's storied history. This is the 20th year of its existence. And this is one of the last in-person gatherings like this until the museum reopens in October. So let's not take for granted that we all get to share a room of human energy and spirituality together. So thank you very much. Thank you, Kijo, for welcoming us in. And don't go too far because I have questions for you on this panel too.
I have questions for you.
Mm-hmm. I need to actually say how we met, because we've known each other for several years. And Dr. Dori is not just a colleague and a collaborator, she's also a friend. And we met very professionally because Dori wrote an article for Fast Company about my practice. And at the time, it was something that everyone was losing their minds. Where can we find Black anything? Where can we find Black designers? Where can we find Black artists? And Dori and I were like, we're all here. Everyone simmer down. And the article was about basically both of our practices as polymaths, where it is impossible to put people in the categories that this country often works overtime to do. And so my first question is one of grounding and orientation for the audience, because this word design is thrown around liberally, and I use the word liberally accurately, where it has lost all form of meaning and context. People use the word, most people don't know what it means because it's one of those catch-alls that means a lot of things. So if you can define, because we're going to be using the word a lot, and I want everyone here to understand what we're speaking about. We're having an accessible conversation today, not an elite one. Mm-hmm. So what is design?
Imagine, make, and connect. So
can you say that one more time?
Yeah, imagine, make, and connect. So really design is like imagining, again, possibilities of things. And then you make something to give it a form, and so that you can connect it, to share it with other people, or to connect it to a process. And so when I teach design to like 10, 12-year-olds, I say it's imagine, make, and connect. Because you imagine a lot, right? Because people are always telling you, you're so imaginative, right? And then, okay, we just need materials and tools to make what you're thinking tangible and real, right? But again, what makes it design is the desire to connect it. So connecting is why you might make multiples of something, so I can connect it to more people. And so that's how I talk about design. And then everyone does that. Like, raise your hand. Do you imagine? Do you make? Do you connect? You're officially a designer. But the difference, I think, in the professional designers is that they imagine, make, and connect maybe faster, right? This is where the capitalism comes into play. It's like, how fast can you do it? And then what is like all the things that you may have been exposed to that makes whatever you create sort of toe the line between like familiarity, but like new and novel, so I'm excited about it. So those who are professional designers, I just think that they've had more practice in it, and thus they're able to make it faster or connect it deeper in ways that, again, I'm not able to do so.
Before we start discussing what is inside of the book, I like letting people know how the thing they are taking for granted is made. And so I always talk about this, whether I'm on this side or this side of the dais, to talk about how this book came to be. Where did you get the idea from? Why does this exist, basically? And then if you can tell us, because the context of when Dori made this book is important for everyone to understand too. It didn't just pop up out of thin air. And it is a pioneer. It's the first book of its kind. So if you can speak a little bit about the origin story of it, and then the process of making it.
So the book itself is 20 years in the making, but it came to form. So first, just like how I work. Maybe we'll start with like how I think. So I'm a person who, let's say, composes in her head. So for me, the act of writing or something like that is actually an act of transcription, because I've actually already written it already here. Like, I hear voices in my head and they're telling me what to write in that sense. So that's what, when I say it's like 20 years, because everything in the book has been things that maybe I've given lectures on, or given a presentation on, or things that were just kind of mulling around in my head, but because I was the dean of design, I didn't have any time to kind of put it to paper. So in 2020, the year of the reckoning.
That magical year.
Yeah, the year of the reckoning. OCAD University had announced the outcomes of our Black cluster hire. So up until that time in the Faculty of Design, OCAD University had 0 full-time Black faculty, which is statistically impossible in a city like Toronto to have, like, given all of the creativity and given the, like, population of African, Afro-Caribbean, royalist, long history of Black folks in the town. So for you to have, as an institution, 0 full-time Black faculty, it's like, oh, that's by design. And so coming into that was the first thing was there was 0 Indigenous representation. So first we dealt with that with an Indigenous cluster hire, and then we wanted to have a Black cluster hire to deal with the 0 Black representation. So in 2020, when everyone's like, where's Black designers, where's this, we want Blackness or whatever, we had already had that conversation 2 years before. And the fruits of that, literally was announced the same week as the murder of George Floyd. To the point we were like, do we announce it or not? Because, we don't want them to, like, yes, we announce it, because everyone is now wanting to know, how do I make amends? And OCAD University is showing you how to do it, right? And so that's what happened. And I kept having one-on-one conversations, group conversations, and it was one of those things that I realized I just don't have the bandwidth to have all the conversations, so that I have to give it a mass-produced form, which a book does. At the same time, a few months after the timeline, I had given a presentation at Where's the Black Designers? And so someone from MIT Press contacted me, acquisition editor, and at first I was like, no, because I had a really, really bad experience with MIT Press like 10 years before, where they made me cry. So I was like, no, I don't really think so, but they convinced me, because it was a different person, a different time, and they laid out kind of all the things that they're trying to do to change the industry. So I'm like, and then they said it was 30,000 words, because that was the thing I was worried about, is like, I'm dean of design, I don't have time to write a 65,000 word book. So there was the need to describe what was happening at OCAD in a mass way. There was the moment of the openness of MIT Press, right, to try to make amends, really. That's probably the best way to explain it, to try to make amends for, all their neglect. And there was a deep calling, in the sense that people were asking, like, what does it mean to do this? What does it mean to make amends in some ways? What does it mean to address all the harm that you've done? And what did it mean for all these bright, Black and Indigenous people who are all of a sudden put in these roles of like, come help us be racially just, and not really understanding what a difficult task that is. So Decolonizing Design, the book, came out of like, I want to explain to institutions, and I wanted to explain to all these DEI people who've been put into these roles how difficult the work is of doing it with a case study of success, right? Because the news reports all the failures of it, but like OCAD University still is a success story in terms of like, how do you screw up? How do you recognize you need to change? How do you push through the institution to make all the changes happen that need to happen? And then how do you celebrate that and build upon it in a way that makes people feel like truly they can belong? So that the origin of the books came out, and then I was like, oh, well, who do I want the team to support this? And everyone who's worked on the book, so Sadie Red Wing did the beautiful cover. So Sadie's a Lakota decoder designer, a person I mentored for maybe 2016. So by then, like 7 or 8 years. The beautiful illustrations is done by Enna Aggie, who's a Nigerian-Canadian illustrator, again, a former student who I mentored. The interior of the book is designed by MoAD Studio, which is a bi-coastal design firm, Silas Monroe and Brian Johnson. And Silas was someone I mentored. I think we figured out like 15 years or something. So for my first book, like I write forever, but for my first book, I really wanted it to surround it with people who I loved, who I trusted, who understood the body of work that I was trying to express in the world, and give that a tangible form that respected the content that was in the book, the words that was in the book. So I talk about the book is ours. Like, whenever I talk to any of them, I'm like, how's our book doing? Because they was like, how's your book? No, it's not my book. How is our book doing? The writing is mine, but the book is ours. And there's, again, the love and respect and care is deeply embedded in all aspects of the design within it. And again, breaking rules where, like, so buy the book because we have profit sharing, so a portion of all the profit goes to the design team to do it, because again, it's our book, and there's a way where I had to have the conversation with MIT Press even, where it's like, like in your contract you require all the money and all the things to come to me, but the artifact of the book itself is a communal property. So can we figure out a way of profit sharing within the contract itself, right? And that was like, they were like, what? I don't understand that. Except they do, because when you do illustration book, right, they do it that way, but designers have to give up, right, all of their rights, sign their rights all over to the author as part of that process. So sorry, that was like a really long explanation, but
No, it's not
that's
a really.
how it was.
It's not a really long explanation. That's what everyone here needs to know. And tagging onto that, I would like you to talk to all of us about how you organized the information in this book. I think it's really important because the question I get as a designer more than anything else is, how did you do that?
So the first chapter, quote unquote, that I wrote was actually chapter 3, and that was I would say that I call it that's the OCAD University chapter, because that's what I thought what the whole book was going to be about, and it sprang from my head like Athena, like it was fully formed, like the distance between what was here and the final version is like maybe just a little bit of editing, like the tiniest bit of editing. It was so fully formed and tight as a chapter. And then chapter 2 and 3 were originally one really, really long chapter. And then I had to figure out how to break it up. And what those were ones was like, and they ended up 2 and 3 because I was like, okay, I need to give some historical context for why the work at OCAD was so difficult because it was going against 150 to 200 years of a story of design being something that happened in Europe in the 1800s. And I'm trying to talk about the fact that you need to open that to allow more diverse peoples and diverse perspectives to come into design practice. So I had to kind of set up why it was necessary to do the work at OCAD. But the chapter 1 was putting Indigenous first, and that's the decolonizing part of the story, where to understand, again, Europe as the European mythology of design is something that happened in Europe in the 1800s. You kind of have to understand the context of colonization. And I've lived in many different places. So I've lived in the United States, I lived in Australia for a while, I lived in, then at the time, Toronto for a while. So I had a very global perspective on colonization and the resistance towards colonization that continue within Indigenous communities. And so that putting Indigenous first meant that had to be the first chapter. It had to be the moral and ethical grounding as to why, let's say we go back to the work we were doing at OCAD, and the first cluster hire that we did was an Indigenous cluster hire first. And to talk about, in some ways, the tensions of me being an African American and having to practice humility in relationship to Indigenous communities because I am a guest, in some ways, on their land. And so that shifted. And then chapter 5 was the money question, because everyone's like, well, okay, what did it cost to do this? And is it going to be too expensive for us to decolonize the design? And that was really explaining, in some ways, like, it's about OCAD University never had money as an institution. Like, I had a budget that I literally had to figure out how to cut 5 to 10% of that budget every year. But I was like, all budgets are finite, so it's all about how you're prioritizing what existing resources that you had. And for a period of 5 years, we prioritized this process of indigenization and diversification of the faculty and the outcomes that come with that, and made other choices and sacrifices because we said this is the most important thing we can be spending our money on. But it was all within constantly shrinking budgets. And also it's like, when it comes to the theft of Indigenous land, there is no price that you can pay that ever will address all of the harm and the loss that is there. So anytime you want to talk about budget, just you need to shut up, because if you had to pay rent, right, even if you had to pay rent to Indigenous landlords for the land in which you are on, it would never cover all that you owe. And so the structures kind of came out of, the difficult ones were like 2, 3, and 4, like what comes first and what comes second. But like putting Indigenous first, that was easy. The money question, that was like, again, moving into action, and trying to figure out those 3 chapters and what comes first and what comes second. Took a while to really find the right structure and cadence that led intellectually as well as emotionally people through a journey.
So now that we know how you conceptually came up with the organizational structure of the book, and you address the kind of institutional, global way of thinking about this. But as I was reading it again, I kept thinking about the personal and the personal responsibility, because we're a group that's here sitting, speaking to you. We can move it over to the institutional, but I'm always more interested in the personal and the cultural responsibility of these things, because institutions are made up of the actions of people. And we tend to kind of third person institutions when we speak about these things, and we lose the intimate access that we all have in taking responsibility for our collective roles. And so what is the average person reading your book supposed to glean in terms of concept, rigor, and action?
In some ways, it's so at the end of each chapter, I provide key takeaways, because for a long time I worked as a consultant, and so you have to give people something actionable to do, and it has to be like 5 to 7, because if you give more, then they're like, I'm overwhelmed. So that was intentional, because what I wanted people to do is, one, follow the emotional journey of it. Like there is a general storytelling arc, right? With the crisis moment coming in chapter 4. And I wanted, again, to be deeply, deeply grounded in a theoretical perspective, just because that's what I am. I'm a scholar, right? Like, so I can't help but dig deeper into the origin of things. But I also wanted people, and I guess the personal aspect of it is that I wanted them to follow, in some ways, my journey of learning, making mistakes, having people very generously accept those mistakes, but then don't make the same mistake again, right? Make amends and don't hurt again. So what I want people to feel through me in some ways is that the work of building respectful relationships with other people, other communities, and I say specifically cultural communities, the work of doing that is the work, right? Like it is the work of the soul, it is the work of the heart, it is the work of the mind, in the sense of when you think of like how much time we spend trying to work through all the things that keep us divided from one another, right? So what I want people who read the book to do is say, here I am, as flawed as I am, but I want to be able to connect to other people and other cultures. And I'm going to have the grace to understand that I will mess things up, but I will learn. I will know who I am, and I will open myself to learning who other people are so that we can build a more harmonious, culturally just world together, right? And so, step one is know thyself. Understand your own histories. Locate your positionality. Like, that's the thing I talk a lot these days about, is like, you have to locate your own positionality within the structures of the United States, where you have deep structural divisions and hierarchies, of which whiteness is at the top and blackness is at the bottom, and everyone else has to like somehow figure out their way in between these structures, right? So you have to do the work of figure out who you are in your history and your positionality within that. And then from there, you have to basically give up white supremacy as a structure, as a cultural structure, as a racial structure. And indigenous ways of knowing, because they're so oppositional to colonial thinking, white supremacy, that they provide a good pathway of how to get to that deeper understanding without that kind of hierarchy in place. And then just do the work and know you're going to make mistakes and know that it's going to hurt. But understand the reward of all of that work and hard is inner connection and peace, and the ability to connect to others in really deep and meaningful ways. And that's what I mean by like liberatory joy, right? That's the outcome of following this decolonial journey, so that you can connect to others and be able to stand up against harm.
Beautiful response.
Was that too abstract? Do you need like a practical example or something?
Oh no, I'm going to get there.
Okay.
I'm going to get there. Because it's the perfect segue for the real talk of where we are right now. There was, at some point, I was going to bring that into, we have this beautiful bubble of time and space and safety that Moneta and Kijo and the MoAD crew have given us. Thank you. But there's also the outside world. So, and I'm curious about what you think, not from a punditry place of discussion, but as someone who made this book 4 years ago and has gone on tours and has spoken with countless people, that has been on stages like this one all over the country and internationally also. And we're all watching this slide back.
Attempted slide back.
Yeah, but it's also, shit's going down.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna just say what it is. So I'm curious about your perspective as someone who is not just coming with receipts, that's not just coming with smart ways of thinking, grounded, applicable, tangible. When you are watching this shift right now, what is your sense of kind of your vantage point in what you've seen over these last few years?
I was the outcome of what my hopeful outcome of what is happening right now is that I don't want to use the term reinvest. We re-embrace community. Because, okay, so
What does that mean?
I'll frame it like a couple of weeks ago as a thought experiment. I went through my entire life and all the federal government policies that like allowed me to get an education, allowed my dad to get a house for us to grow in, that opened me up to like having a job. Like so, I went through and I did the work of saying, okay, this policy came into play in 1968. I was born in 1972. I had we had reduced lunch. That policy came in, like the original version in 1938 or something, and then like a redo in the 1970s or whatever. And I went through that process to say, okay, these are all the touch points in which the federal government has been supportive. And realizing that, like, again, it wasn't, as Black folks, we've never been able to rely on the federal government until like 1964. Again, I'm born in 1972. So I always say like, I am actually one of the first generations of African Americans to be born free. Right? Because up until then, Emancipation Proclamation, Jim Crow, all these sort of things, like, freedom, I say they may have been free, but they weren't liberated, right? So there's a part of me that's like, I did that exercise because I immediately after Trump was elected, like again, we wrote 2025, they said they were going to dismantle all this infrastructure. So I was like, okay, let me go through and look at all the things that the federal government provides. They provide regulation for the pollution of our waters and our lands and our food and all these other things. So I need to come up with an alternative food system. And I said, okay, I'm going to do 3 things. One, there's a Black-owned farm in Acton, California, so I'm going to start getting my vegetables from there. Again, there's a farmer's market. The great thing about living in Los Angeles is that, again, most of the food in the United States is actually grown like 100 miles away. So the farmer's market are like real farmer's market in that sense. So I was like, so I'm going to stop going to Whole Foods and I'm going to go to the farmer's market. And then I joined a community garden, and in my community garden, I'm growing medicinals. Because the other thing that we won't be able to afford is, and I already know that coming from Canada and having to pay, last year it was like $1,200 a month for insurance. I then got a lower quality insurance, so I'm paying now $700 a month. And so I was like, okay, I can't, if I get sick, last thing I want to do is go to the doctor because that's like bankruptcy. So I'm going to grow herbal medicine. And then I went to the library and I got all these books around like, African American folk medicine, Indigenous folk medicine, Latin America folk medicine. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to grow herbals, right? Herbal medicine in our community garden. Share it with the other people in the community garden because all of them are growing food. So I'm like, okay, I'll trade you some tomatoes from some All Hill so that we can be, which is part of it again. It's like, okay, let's go back to barter systems, right? Because I can't trust that my money is going to be worth anything anymore because that's the next thing that's going to crash, right? So in my head, I'm going through every single, education, you're not going to be able to afford education, so we need to start putting more education online for our folks, right? So that they may not have the formal credentials, but again, if I'm, I'm still a Stanford graduate, I still, have been a professor, like the quality of my knowledge is not going to decrease if you don't have to pay $60,000 a semester in order to get it. So then that's the other thing that, like, again, we are going to have to educate ourselves. So when I say community, is that, so again, Black folks, Indigenous folks even now, like, we've not gotten so much from the federal government until 1964. That means there are people in my life who know what it means to live under the neglect of the federal government. They know what systems to put in place to shore up what it is you need and want on the basis of that neglect. So first tap in to the elders and say, what did you do when you couldn't get loans? What did you do when you couldn't, go into the grocery store? What did you do when again, like, you didn't know, it was like the Green Book in the exhibition, right? We talked about coming back because we don't know where it's safe to stop or not safe to stop anymore, right? So that to me is like, those are all the very practical things all that means is like mutual aid and coming to community and setting up all of these systems in which we get our food and our health and our education outside of our dependency on the federal government. And I guess the reason why I say like attempted, because and again, it's what I'm tapping into. I am tapping into so many of the community networks who are like, again, like, ICE is seeking to deport a lot of people, and they can't because people in the community, there's people in the community now in Los Angeles who are going around in trucks with bullhorns, calling out when they see ICE, putting that on like a database that people sort of put up that people can follow in real time, and then again, escape. There are people who are making sure that there are multiple translations in every language of how to avoid or what to do when ICE tries to knock on your door, and if they don't have a legal signature from a judge, you don't have to do anything, right? So I'm tapped into all the community efforts that are spending every single moment fighting back, right? And that's where I feel in all of this, again, in the immortal words, that I feel hopeful, right? Like, I'm not optimistic, because that would require that I have to trust whatever the 60-70% of white folks that have shown me who they are, and I'm like, and I believe them, right? But I am hopeful that enough of us will be in solidarity with one another and to see how in supporting one another that we can be whatever the federal government isn't for us, for each other. And to a certain extent, like, that builds a better world, right? To not have to rely on President Trump for your well-being, because that's what he wants. Like, a dictator is like, rely upon me for everything that you need, right? So to be able to like say, no, I'm not gonna do that.
We're good, thanks.
Yeah, and community has my back, right? Like, that's where we want to be as a people, right? That's how I feel about it. So I see this moment as an opportunity to, again, deepen our relationship as community, so that we reduce our dependencies on things that again, like, if you look at history, was like, the government was never set up to support me, right? And it's hard to do that, right? Because as I talk about, like, the positionality of African Americans has always been, let us into the system, let us into your schools, let us into your institutions, let us into your neighborhoods, let us be next to you, right? Sitting at the counter. And we also know that, like, again, when we say, okay, we're going to set up and do our own thing, the moment it gets prosperous, they literally drop bombs on us, right? And that's where I think the broader solidarity becomes really important. Like I always say, like, I'm into maroon power right now, because if you got Black folks and Indigenous folks in true solidarity with one another, it's all over. It is all over, because Indigenous people are the land. We, as Black folks, are the labor. They need us for numbers, right? Because sometimes they get pushed over because their populations have been systematically designed to reduce the number of them to keep the number small, right? So I always feel like if we can make that alliance really happen in a deep way, that we have the basis of designing a more just society, and saying no to this hierarchy of white supremacy that everyone is suffering under. You know, even the president of Ukraine is suffering under this white supremacy system, right? That's being re-erected.
Thank you. Fantastic answer. I want to bring Kijo into this conversation for a second.
We talk about houses now and interiors.
Because it's a transition for this book as a guide. We spoke about the personal piece. I want to bring it back to the fact that we're in a museum right now, and we are here for a reason. That this Liberatory Living show that I hope you all get a chance to tap into before the museum closes on Monday. This book has been used as a reference by more people than would admit. Behind the scenes in museums all over the freaking country, this book has been referenced. And Dori doesn't get her due. And so I'll just say it so everybody knows it. And so I would love Kijo to speak a little bit to the tenets in this book that contributed to your conceptual thinking about liberatory living.
Certainly. I mean, I think that thinking about the principles in the book, beginning with how do we decentralize Europe. So I'm trained in African American studies, and that's like the first thing you learn. And I was always surprised about Black folks being called marginal, liminal, because they've always been at the center of my thinking. And so I just drew through that throughway in that way. But what you laid out, Dori, was really specific ways. So you might notice when you walk into the door and the first pillar that you enter is not necessarily a land acknowledgement, because sometimes I'm like, are we going to give it back? And if not, then what are we acknowledging except thievery? But also acknowledging the land and acknowledging the labor simultaneously as this gesture toward this community and communal way of being. I think it was also really specifically in breaking down the barrier between art and design. So this idea that Black art was super hot on the market, but who designed your sofa? Is there any other cultural reference in your space? I'm always like, who is Lorna Simpson talking to in that living room? And so are we recolonizing a work of art by placing it in an all-white space? Also to the fact of really amplifying design as a part of meaning making. So all of the text that you see that was designed by our graphic designer was so specific to each theme, to each moment in the exhibition, as well as I don't really do white walls. So it's also the decision that somebody made at some point that white walls were the best way to display art, that every pedestal should be 36 inches tall. And my point was, well, what if you're a child or a person who uses a wheelchair? Or I just want the sculpture to feel dangerous, right? So there are these ways in which and saying no to the spaces and places that run afoul of my values. So, the opportunity to work at some venerable institutions were wonderful, but I came to MoAD on purpose because it's so agile, because I have a lot of autonomy, because I wanted to do a show called Diasporic Drapetomania and was told, well, you can't do a show called that because nobody knows what it is. And I was like, but y'all made it up. Drapetomania is a pseudo-psychological term used to describe enslaved people who absconded with themselves. You must be crazy for running away. So they came up with a note to say that was a kind of madness. But what I was interested in is, what is the aesthetics of escape that circulates, right, around the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans? I think I said enough. So it was really
great.
So helpful in the ways of thinking about how to make sure that design was meeting all of the other arts that are appearing in this exhibition.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And can I say, let me just stop for a moment because I'm going to probably cry, but I'm so appreciative of this conversation in the sense of like, so people go back and they're like, oh my God, this book was so wonderful. But we never really get to have the conversation like in the specificity of it, of like, where is it coming from and which things inspired you and why did it inspire you and then what did it move you to make or do. So I'm so appreciative of this moment because it's a thing where I do talk to people, but we never get to that question, right? So thank you for that.
That's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
What else are we doing here? So I would love to include you guys. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I want to make sure that we have Elizabeth. How much time do we have?
Over half an hour.
Okay,
We got
great. We have time. I have a few more questions, but I want to make sure that you guys get in. It's always the thing at the end, and people, someone's always left out. So I want to make sure that if you guys have any questions, you can speak to that now. If you can raise your hand and speak up with any question that you have for Dori.
Yeah.
So my question, is there another way we can define ourselves or describe ourselves without using colonial references? Meaning, the fact is we always find that we have a need to defend, define, justify who we are. So we always find ourselves subordinate to the oppressor by using oppressive terms to define us. And I love your work. I use your work. As I told you, I use your work with my students. But I always feel like, and I've always felt this way as a student, as one wanting to be a creative, is that we always have to validate who we are, that constant. And I have a quote here from Toni Morrison talking about racism, and we'll always have to be defending ourselves, or articulating or validating why we belong, and which distracts us from other creative endeavors or empowerment that could send us. So the question is, how can we redefine ourselves without using sort of oppressive terms?
Yeah.
Because decolonizing, I get it, I share it with my students, but I also find myself saying, we were before there were colonies, we were.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you start your book with the indigenous people is a great beginning. And then how do we go beyond that? Will there be a period of time where we can define ourselves by just being who we are?
Yeah, I mean, that's where the talks I've been giving, or care shops I've been giving lately, is about liberatory joy. And so let me go back a little bit. The book itself was written, the only aspect of like the white gaze was, again, like the MIT editor who was just saying, Dori, white people will read this too, so you do have to make a nod to the fact that they might be readers. And again, it's like, I was like, I don't care what they're thinking, this book is not about the white gaze. But I'm like, okay, I'll throw a bone, right? I'll throw a bone. Because, I do want to sell to white people too, because they have things to learn and to do. So but I would say the book itself is written for, like, in my head, this is for the young person who just got put in some DEI role. And I'm gonna give you a guidance on how to navigate your way into the spaces you've been asked to go into. So there's really not, like, that's an internal conversation. Liberatory joy is what I talk about now. First of all, because, like, if I put decolonize, I put the title of my book, even on LinkedIn, which is whatever, I was like, I am so shadow banned. Like, I have like 8,000 plus followers on Instagram, and only like 50 people see what I post because I'm so shadow banned on the platform. And so, and again, like, I teach a course, Whiteness Without White Supremacy, and we had to, like, figure out, we had to repost it like 5 different ways to try to get past the shadow banning, even on LinkedIn, right? Like, LinkedIn, they go through the thing where they'll do like they'll do the captions for you, right? And they refused to caption it because they didn't want to reproduce the language. So that's just to say, I've been talking about liberatory joy because it's pre-colonial, right? Like, the argument I'm making is that when we were more deeply connected to ourselves and our people and our communities, when we were not separated from one another, we created these conditions of liberatory joy. We could say no to the things that harmed us. Or aspire to do so, or figure out how to do so, or use our creativity to figure out how to say no to those things, right? We were deeply connected to ourselves. We knew who we were. We knew who our ancestors were. We knew who our communities were. And we included the land and the water and the air and the animals as part of that community as well. And we all had a higher purpose of being. And what colonialism has done is try to separate us from ourselves, separate us from our communities, separate us from the land, separate us from a higher purpose, because in colonization, the only purpose is to hoard wealth, right? That's it. So for me, I talk more about liberatory joy as a kind of oblique way to get back to, okay, if you don't want me to talk about whiteness without white supremacy, if you don't want me to talk about decolonization, let me talk about the real thing. Because the real thing we want in all of that is to create a pathway of liberatory joy for ourselves and those who we care about. And I was up in Calgary just 2 days ago, giving a workshop on the ROI of liberatory joy, and it was amazing because there was 50 people in the room, like different ages, so there we had students and administrators, different, again, different backgrounds. It was a fairly, mostly white, but a fairly diverse group. And at the end of the 3-hour workshop, like, everyone had shared what it is that they wanted to say no to and felt that they couldn't, and the pathway they were going to follow in order to be able to get to that no. And that's what I want for everyone, right? To say no, to be able to say no to that which is harmful, and then through connection, it is through connection and sharing that we get the courage to be able to say that no. And what happens when you say no to that which is harmful? You then open yourself up to be able to say yes to the things that give you meaning and love and care and joy and connection and all those sort of things. So for me, that's like that's the evolution beyond this conversation of decolonization for me. Because for me, let's see, what has been lost because of the election of Trump is the faith that I have that if I explain things in an emotional and intelligent and accessible and gentle way, that people will do the right thing. Like, that's been that. naivete, wishful thinking has been lost, right? And but again, I'm forever hopeful. So I'm like, well, maybe I'm gonna just do it in a different way. And I'm actually just gonna focus on the communities, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm just focusing on solidarity, right? So I'm only talking to those who are ready to join in, and let's figure out a way to move through this together. I'm not gonna put as much energy for those who are still thinking about it and trying to figure it out. And I'm definitely not putting any energy into those who've like decided they want to go the wrong way. Yeah, sorry. I give long answers. And tomorrow we'll figure out world peace.
What does liberatory joy mean to the girl in those pictures, and how does that understanding influence your work now?
Oh, well, like I said, like I said, I consider myself like one of the first generations of African Americans to be born liberated. Maybe that's the way, not free, but liberated. In the sense, and so, and I say I'm inherently a joyful person, and people are like, what do you mean by that? But what it means is that like by environment and by nature, I can't help but to connect, right? I was very grateful that I was born with a deep sense of understanding of who I am. And my pain in the world is not understanding who I am or what I want. It is whether or not I can shape an environment around me that supports who I am and what I want to contribute to the world. And so I'm inherently a joyful person. Because my nature is one of connecting. I studied anthropology. Why? Because it's the one discipline that teaches you how to try to connect to other people around great differences in culture and meaning and language, right? All of these sort of things. How to use yourself as a tool to break down the differences and the distances between people. And again, I understand all the colonization that came with anthropology as a field. Like I said, founding fathers of physical anthropology didn't think I had the cranial capacity to be in the class with learning about them. But I always hold on to the fact that when other disciplines were debating whether or not these were human beings that they were encountering across the world, the anthropologists were saying, cultural anthropologists were saying, they are human beings, and look, they have religion like us, and they have family structure like us, or different from us, but at least they have those human qualities, so perhaps we should treat them more humanely. Full of egocentrism, right? But again, that gesture of, can we connect? Can we find a pathway of connection across difference? And that's kind of who I am as a person. And that's the joyful aspect of who I am. And like I said, the liberatory part, like I said, in this moment, I'm having to reconcile actually what that means to me. Because what we haven't talked about, like again, it's like when at the pinnacle of my career in oppressive systems, at OCAD University, the way I described my experience there as being a super token, right? Where, again, institutions love me, I'm really smart, they can use all my talents, but they hate the fact that I'm the talented person, so constantly getting bullied. I've been bullied in every position that I've been in. So the thing that I'm realizing right now that's part of my liberation is I don't think I want to be in elite institutions anymore. And it's hard because people are like, but Dori, you can survive in there. Go and go and take up this presidency, go and take up this deanship, go and join this corporation, right? Because you've already proven that you can survive in these elite institutions and not lose a sense of who you are. But the moment of liberatory reckoning that I'm having is like just every aspect of my soul says I don't want to be there anymore. And I'm getting these really beautiful reminders of why I don't. Just a really practical, again, example where one institution at Harvard wanted to invite me to come to be on a talk. And their offer was, we will only pay for your accommodation and offer you an honorarium of $150. And it was one of those things like, so again, I've been a professor, I know where that comes from. You never have money, you're always underfunded. So I understand like they were in some ways shooting their shot to see if they could get someone. But I had to respond back to them in the sense of like, if I was still a dean of design, I would have thought about it. Because again, I have a basis in this elite institution that would subsidize basically my presence at your conference. But I don't, right? I am not in that position anymore. I have to get paid a living wage because I have to pay my bills. And I live in LA, one of the most expensive cities in the world. So I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the fact that you do, but it is actually working against everything that I talk about in decolonizing design for me to accept your invitation. And it devalues my work in the context of you understanding that I would do that just because I would be able to say I gave a talk at Harvard, right? And that was the part where I was like, y'all need to come correct because you know, yes, some people, if I was 20 years younger, I might be like, oh my God, I need to get Harvard on my resume. And so I will pay, like the $150 doesn't even cover the cost of like my transit from home to LAX, right? Like I had to pay negative money to participate. But they were like, because we're Harvard, you'll probably do that, right? And that's where I'm like, this is why I don't want to be in elite institutions anymore. The mentality that someone would have to lose out economically for the social capital of being able to say they come to Harvard, and that I don't want to be there. And that's my liberation, is trying to understand as a person who's, as a super token, her entire life has been primed and prepared by community and everyone around her to be in these elite institutions. To reject that means I have to realize that I'm actually not rejecting the sacrifices that everyone has made to make sure I can be in those elite institutions, but that those elite institutions are rotten to the core, and that I need to find another way to use my talents and genius and understanding of things, because that's actually going to provide me with true liberation, right?
I want to make sure that we get a couple more questions in.
Sorry.
Okay, but and this is all great, but I want to make sure.
Yeah,
that
no, I'm
gets
sorry.
a chance to ask.
I'm sorry, not sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, not sorry.
What are you apologizing?
I know.
Any other questions?
I had a quick one. Hi, nice to meet you. I really loved the talk from both of you. I work in tech, and I noticed your second chapter was about bias in tech, and I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, okay, so the summary of it, I'll go to the summary just in case it gets too long in my response. The problem with technology is that it is still based, when you think of human-computer interaction, because is based on human-to-human interaction, that human-human interaction is that of master and slave. So again, technology is just a tool. We can use it for a variety of things. But because the underlying consciousness of it is master and slave, right? I always say 200 years ago, Siri would have been a black woman going to tell you where the weather is today, right? Trying to provide you with goods and services that you were requesting. Like, that's the way we talk to Siri, right? And so what we need to do is to change the underlying consciousness by which we develop our technology so that they are not used to accelerate harm, right? They're not used to enslave people. You should be able to opt out. You should be able to give consent and not buried in some legalese language and whatever. And so, and this is the part where like putting Indigenous first, they're amazing because Indigenous ways of knowing and being and thinking are so far away in some communities from that master-slave ideal. You have the concept of like all my relations, right? So how do you give technology sort of agency and consciousness to be able to say no to a request, for example? How do you use it in ways to deepen connections instead of deepen divisions? So the problem with our technologies and like is that the underlying consciousness of it will only accelerate our structures of master and enslavement. And our fantasies and our nightmares are just about, again, white people experiencing things that Black and Indigenous and Asian people have experienced as being enslaved, except the masters of the technology, right, instead of white men. So do we change the underlying consciousness of our technology so that it is liberating for everyone? AI is just, for me, the technology of artificial intelligence is just an accelerant. So what is it accelerating? Again, it seems it's going to be accelerating the disintermediation of people from their work. And not even the work that we don't like, right? Like, it's like, I don't know. People who choose to be an artist because they love to do that, why would you create a technology that disintermediates artists from the work that they love to do?
Don't even get me started on that.
Right, but again, so again, this is like, what's the underlying consciousness that is driving the design of that particular technology, right? And it also takes up, it's facilitating colonization because it requires all this land to put these server farms that are not in the cloud but actually on land, and it requires all this water when we don't have enough water. So again, it's like colonization 0.50, but just even more deeply accelerated in that sense. So, and again, it's because the underlying consciousness of it is like, why is the ultimate technology a soldier or a sex bot? Right? Domination of women, domination of other people. Underlying consciousness of it is completely wrong, right? And so that's my beef with technology, is that all computer technology is, it makes things faster. So what are the things that are being made faster? Are there things that we really want to be made in the world at all? And the fact that it requires the enslavement of people in Congo, right, in order to provide the materials for it, like, again, this is, gold rush 250. So right now I'm feeling very, disappointed in technology because we can't solve the problem of what is the underlying consciousness of that master and slave relationship that is built into everything that we put into it. And it's a human problem. The technology are like, I'm just existing as you tell me to, right? So how do we do the work of healing, right? That harm that we cause to each other and we cause to ourselves, And maybe we need to slow down in order to do that work so that the technologies we do build, right, again, center connection, get rid of any actually hierarchy that might exist, and definitely doesn't seek to enslave people to some kind of screen, right, so that they're not able to interact with each other. Like I so dislike the technology of like VR, right? Because you're creating a holistic system that disconnects you from nature, disconnects you from the world around you, and disconnects you to each other, because we still can't figure out how to do social VR very well, right? And so that's where I'm at right now, where it's like, show me the possibilities of technology that are actually liberating. And some of that, like I said, might be liberating the tech, where the tech can be like, no, I don't feel like doing that today, because I'd rather sit and meditate for 20 minutes, but I'll get back to you on your request for the weather, right? Until we're ready to let go of that control, then most technologies will be useless to the real project of liberatory joy.
We're in a bit of a conundrum right now where our institutions are becoming more and more dependent on these technologies, and these elite institutions are the primary production spaces of theory, thought, and applied, technology. So what do you suggest to those of us who work in these spaces on how to think about our participation, where we cultivate ourselves and how we deploy things, considering like where we're at and the fact that we're actively also getting pushed out of our industry?
You want to respond to that?
No, I'm going to say I'm going to respond to that.
Okay.
No, you go first.
Okay. Okay, then I'm gonna keep it really brief so you can hear what he has to say, what George has to say. So the purpose of the super token, let me go back to that, is in some ways to help the transformation of an institution. And I always used to tell my students, like, I don't want you to go work for Greenpeace, but you definitely don't want to work for Halliburton. But I want you to find the institution that's kind of a bit on the like edge of like, are they going to go positive or are they going to go negative, right, in terms of their impact to the world. And I want you to be there to be part of the tipping point, right, of helping the institution go positive. Now, this is the part where I'm kind of having to rethink myself, right, in the sense of like, so many institutions are trying to like tip towards the negative, right? And I always say that if you feel that you can no longer be effective in that institution in terms of that moving the needle, right, then it's time for you to leave. Because, and I describe this quite emotionally in the book itself, because again, that's when you become Toby and not Kunta Kinte, right? So the reference for this is the mini drama Roots that came out in the 1970s, and so there's a moment where Kunta Kinte, he's been enslaved, and the white overseer is whipping him, trying to get him to change his name to Toby, and he refuses. So the interaction back and forth is, your name is Toby, and Kunta Kinte, no, my name is Kunta Kinte, and that's the moment that I'm referring to. So in that sense, I always say like, and for me, part of why I'm saying I might need to step out of elite institutions is that I'm so angry. I'm so angry at how so many of them, that I doubt my own effectiveness in being able to kind of push them towards the light. And so I'm like, I can't put myself in that environment, because instead of like removing myself, I might try to figure out how to burn it all down. And I'm very clever in, maybe that's the thing, is like, I am very clever, and that could be working for you or against you, right? And so for me, it's a thing where if you're in a place where you can help tip, then help tip. That's why you're there, right? But the moment you realize like that there's nothing you can do to help this space, right? Help this place, then go off and find either that other place that's in the tipping point, or build your own so that people can find a place to go away from that toxicity. So that's where I sit within that.
Yeah, that last sentence is what I was going to spend a few minutes talking about. Black people, we gotta create our own shit, period, end of story. It's not any more complicated than that. It's not a long dissertation. It's as simple as everything that we have worked towards in the time that we have been in this country. This tired notion that institutions are going to do the right thing. Hopefully this election has disavowed this of the last of us in our community. It's like, it's really time to move on from this conversation. If you are working inside of a structural institution, it's fine. But just know you are not going to be as effective as we have been talking ourselves into riddles and circles around. We are going to have to create our own systems, yes, again, and again, and again, and again. It is a choice that we are all here. It is by divine ordinance that we are here. We have contributed to the foundational fabric of this country. We're not going anywhere. And for those that want to leave and go to other countries, I say go with God. But that is not my decision. I'm not going anywhere. I am here to build, to create structural, emotional, tangible, tactile, innovative, creative solutions on a daily basis. I've worked for myself for the last 14 years. I have succeeded, I've made mistakes, I've failed, I've had to reset, and I wake up every morning and I wouldn't be doing it any other way. And so make your decision, but don't be in this null place of, I'm not sure what to do. No, you do know what to do. And that is what I say to not just every Black person, but to every person. I live in the Bay Area. I've lived here for 25 years. I've had a ringside seat to this insanity. I have been both the inside, because it's the origin point of a lot of what is plaguing our country, our planet right now. It's this singular, selfish, I'm gonna go to the gold rush place and make it for myself and fuck everybody else. Yeah. And it's this selfishness that is a cancer throughout our society right now. We all have personal responsibility. We all individually play a role in the society we are living in. Everyone should act like that. We all have culpability. We all are an active part of our successes and our failures. And so the question directly to the person who asked the last question, it's a brilliant question. It is one that a lot of people are deep inside of trying to figure out a solution. And it's an ongoing question to answer. So it's not going to be defined in the next 6 months, next 6 years. It's ongoing. But we are just gonna have to build our own shit, and that's it.
And the book I'm working on now, I'm interviewing for my second book, which is Super Tokens.
I'm so happy you're talking about it.
Super Tokens, the first and onlys in design and tech. So if any of you are first and only, come talk to me. I'm halfway through. I want to do 50 interviews. I'm halfway through 25 of them I've done. And it's, in some ways, the question that you ask is the question that everyone asks themselves, like, why are they in these elite institutions? And the common denominator in terms of the response is to hold space for the next generation, to keep the gates open for the next generation. And that's why, like, again, I entered elite institutions. It's like, okay, if I can get in there and create space for more people to come, then we can reach a critical mass to be able to transform this institution from, from good to bad or whatever. And the thing that is happening, like Nick, again, in the conversations, is everyone is finding that what is someone said is that am I just opening up space in the plantation, right, in the modern plantation, and should I be doing that? And then, but then we ended up having the conversation about, so again, if you're going to build from scratch, like what is the basis of the, let's say, redistribution of wealth that allows you to do that, right? What allows you to pay for people's labor? Where does the income come from to build your own institutions? So my answer was always like, I'm in this institution and I'm doing reparations. I redistribute. When I was at OCAD, I redistributed so much money outside of that institution, like their head is still spinning. Yet, like, again, it's like, can you still do that in this moment? And that's where a lot of them are saying, I might be at this institution, I might be making the $1 million a year, and that's important because actually I support a lot of people with that. I set up scholarships, I do this, I do that, I do that. But it's like, is it now just opening the gate open to the plantation rather than really doing the work of dismantling the structures of it that we can rebuild? But how long what's my exit plan is the conversation we've been having, where it's like, okay, if you need to be there for 2 years to build this financial basis, because anyone who's going to build something new will need that, maximize what you can get in those 2 years so that then you're ready to not just build whatever you're building, but help other people build within that. And that's the hard conversations that I'm having now with all those people in elite institutions, is like, what's your exit strategy and how are you going to use all of that access to redistribute wealth, either through you as a person in an institution, or again, while you're there, optimize everything that you send out of that institution for people.
Before I thank you for your brilliance, thank you everyone for being as engaged and present as you have been in this conversation. We're leaving it on a cliffhanger deliberately because
Come back for Super Tokens.
what's
talk
gonna
for
happen next? What is next for Dr. Dori is Super Tokens. It's a book that she's been gestating on for a couple of years. I happen to know a lot of what is happening with this book. It's very exciting, and it's really thrilling. Dori, thank you so much for just being here on planet Earth and allowing us to take in this very necessary, very tangible. The thing I say to everyone after you come to an event like this, please don't make this an abstract conversation in your life. Don't be annoying. This is not abstract. This is applicable information to all of your lives. I'm looking into the souls of every single person in this audience. There are ways to apply all of this directly to your life, and I hope that you will take the challenge and ride into your specific path with this understanding. Kijo, thank you so much for having us. Dr. Dori, you are brilliant. Thank you very, very much.
And thank you. And I wanna thank you in the same way when you talked about the article that I wrote for Fast Company about you, of like being seen and like the questions and the framing of it. I want to thank you for reciprocating that experience back for me. Like, this is one of the few conversations that I've had about the book where I feel seen through the questions and what is being probed in a way that feels liberating. So thank you.
Ooh, Liberation Station. Thank you, guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you.